Our third storyteller is Hamid Khan. Not all of our storytellers are from New Orleans, notwithstanding my incredible PowerPoint slide. And Hamid, as many of you know, is, I guess, fast becoming one of the go-to resources on this question of mass surveillance, the ways in which all the various government and private entities are kind of collecting and gathering all sorts of data about us in ways that we don't really know. So I really kind of respect the ways in which, Hamid, you're trying to tie it all together. But you know, Hamid, as many of you know, is a longtime Los Angeles activist. He's the founder of and was longtime executive director of the South Asian Network. Most recently, as a Soros Justice Fellow, he helped launch the Stop LAPD spying campaign, which is work that continues to this day. So, Hamid Khan.
All right, thank you very much. It's a couple tough acts to follow. So I was looking at this title and just kind of bringing it home to myself. And I was thinking that how do I share stories and not just one? Because I was born and raised in Pakistan, and I come from a culture of tale telling where you speak for hours and hours and hours. But of course, we only have 7 or 8 minutes, and so I was thinking about my own life and how it was not just a moment, but several moments which define not just the life of the law, but a life of lawlessness. And I say that fondly, for myself and also somebody who is always trying to push, who's always trying to tweak, who's always trying to violate, who's always trying to kind of just push the state and the state capitalist system as much as we can. But I think it's more about the life of lawlessness of the structures that we fight that really comes into focus as well. Because as we are constantly told about law, the very people that are telling us and lecturing us are completely being lawless and not following anything at all. So I wanted to share a few moments that have helped me better understand and guide me through this process as well. And these moments go to show the complete lawlessness of people who claim to be governing, people who claim to be in power and are in power, but yet at the same time that how this lawlessness then becomes a total indifference to people and how it humiliates and degrades people as well. So this one story I start with moment is that informed me was that being just very young, I was the first generation in Pakistan that grew up after the partition of India. So it wasn't just one story, but the stories that I heard constantly, which were completely just inserted with constant lament. Lament of violence, lament of displacement, lament of massacre, lament of intense amount of communal violence, and people who maybe just identify their origin from that part of the world probably recognize and understand that I'm talking about, that it can be extremely, extremely traumatic. So constantly you're hearing these violent stories. So you're like, oh my gosh, when do we stop? And come on, Mom, I've heard enough of that. And then, next thing you know, I remember I was 4 years old, and I was in my neighborhood, and there was a bunch of, there was some cops over there. And I realized I saw this man, this policeman, sitting in a chair, and he was having a cup of tea. And next to him was a group of people who were sitting and talking to him too. And then I realized that there was somebody or something right next to the chair where this man was seated. And I think I was like 4 years old or something. And I looked very closely, and what I saw was that this man was on his knees. He was like this. And he was on his knees. He was looking up to this man. And this cop was sitting on a chair. And he had both the legs of the chair on each palm of his hand. And I think it was something. And it was odd because, the first, as I looked at this person, he was looking up this guy, and it first reminded me of this label of a gramophone, his master's voice, where you just have this dog looking into this gramophone thing. And it was just very odd. It was this moment for me, and I started crying. I was 4 years old, and I'm looking at this thing. But that also signified, as I started unpacking these things in my life, that how power intentionally then degrades, how it intentionally humiliates, how it intentionally tries to put you in place. So now I'm moving forward, like, okay, man, I mean, this is intense. Like, we continue to navigate this. And then another moment in time came in my life when India and Pakistan went to war. And all of a sudden, our neighborhood, this was like a dust bowl we used to live in. And next thing you know, everybody's digging trenches. And then you're like, okay, well, when you hear the sirens, just run for the trenches and go and hide in the trenches. And outside, you hear all this bombing going on, and so and what really I learned, and this was something that, again, the link between the trauma of partition, that my mom kept on telling me, and I'm the youngest of 6. I have 2 older brothers and 3 sisters, and then myself. But because of the violence that had happened and the mass sexual assault and rape of women, it was a high rate of women who had committed suicide, that my mom kept on telling me that if the Indians come, and we were in Pakistan, they come here, just kill me and kill your sisters, because we don't want to be raped and we don't want to be subjected to that. And I'm sitting there, I was like, this is in 1965, I was 8 years old, and I'm thinking about it, and I'm actually mapping in my mind, like, well, how do I kill these people? Like, this is something, and it's almost like an order being given by my mother. Of course, there was a couple of sisters I would have killed. So, just because, hey, the older one, we used to get 1 banana a week, and my older sister would snatch that banana away from me. So I was like, oh, okay, this is my chance. But this is how these things happen. Then another moment came where I was about 11. This is in the whole spring of 1968, and there was this thing going on, and Pakistan was being ruled by a military dictator. So I'm coming back from school, and all of a sudden there's this rioting on the street going on, a bunch of students, and I hear this gunshot, and I see this body rise, and this is right around my neighborhood, and I see this body rise, and I see blood coming out of this person's mouth, and the student had been shot. And the next thing I feel, I was very young, so these older students, literally just who knew me from my neighborhood, picking me up on the ground, and I was on this student's shoulder, and they're running with me, and I'm like, where the fuck are you taking me? So you got to get out of here, you got to get home. So these, again, like these moments that continue on. So constantly through this, one theme kept on weaving, that how does power operate? How does it humiliate? How does it degrade? How does it, completely torture you as well? But it was also something that the killing of the student signified something else, that how power is afraid of you. Because after this killing of the student, it turned into this massive movement, which ended up in toppling the dictatorship at that time of Ayub Khan. So then, moving forward, I come to the United States. I was involved in student politics, and basically a lot of life of lawlessness that being led. And my first instance, and here I come from this intense culture of protest, intense culture of protest, rioting, and people taking it in their hands, where I do remember that I was trained when I was a bit older and we would be out on the streets, I was trained how to catch a tear gas canister. So we would get these towels, and we'd keep a wet rag with them, and then as the police would come and shoot tear gas canisters, we would catch them and we would throw them back and slingshot them back at the cops. So you learn. So I come to the United States, and I remember this was in 1979, and I was invited to go to this protest at UCLA. And I'm there at UCLA, and I can never forget this thing. And here I am in this land of, by the people, of the people, for the people. And, you constantly, your colonized mind has said that this is the land of opportunity. And yes, black people are real criminals, and you got to watch them and make sure you don't go there and stay away from the Mexicans and the blacks, So our own internal biases, how we are reoriented and oriented again. So I go there, and all of a sudden, somebody says if they had a permit. And I couldn't quite understand what they were saying, so I asked the question, that permit to do what? And they said, well, permit to have this protest. And I said, are you shitting me? Really? We need a permit to protest? So that's what immediately I was like, this is not by the people, of the people. This is like, give it to the people and control the people. So, just as this saga continues, and I think another moment that came to me was, then again, this stark reminder of what happens to our bodies and how systems are created and these structures of knowledge are created to really dehumanize us. In 2008 and 2009, for 2 years, I walked the migrant trail from Cesa Bay, Mexico to Tucson. This is through Sonora Desert. It's about 77 miles. And this was to really honor the migrants who were crossing the desert. And it's, every year close to about 300 people die, and many get hurt, and many just get injured. But the first year that I was leaving, well, prior to that, I'd gone to southern, just south of Sesame, Nogales, about 100 miles south, 100 kilometers south of that, and gone to this place called Altar. And Altar was a staging ground at that time where close to about anywhere from 1,500 to 2,000 migrants would be staging to cross the desert from there. So now I'm getting ready to do that. I'm in Mexico, and we go to this church. And the pastor started telling a story, and he said that women have been migrating quite a bit. So now a lot of women, 2 weeks before they start this journey, they start taking birth control pills. And they start taking birth control pills because of the high rate of sexual assault. So to avoid pregnancy, they start taking these precautions. And here I am sitting, just thinking about it, that how does this figure in my thought process? When family, friends, your loved ones, your neighbors, your colleagues, when they're leaving on a journey, you never think about these things. You think about, what do you have, have you packed up, what are your flight, or what bus, or whatever, what train are you taking? You never think of reminding somebody that, have you taken your birth control pills? That you may be sexually assaulted and you may be violated. And it's very interesting that on that trip, the first night, as we are camped out, and we had all the privilege of water, we had all the privilege of food, we had, this whole, it's about a 7-day journey through there. And as we are getting ready to have our meal, 2 migrants show up. And they show up, they're completely exhausted, they're just almost ready to die. And when you're crossing the desert, you see these leftover bottles, you see where people panic, and out of anxiety, they start taking off their jackets, and they start leaving their clothes behind. So these 2 migrants came up, and they had food and water, and then they said, we had 3 women with us that we had left behind. And of course, the small party left, and we could never find those women. So we don't know what happened to those women, and just where they went. So it's in essence, I was trying to weave these things through my life. That a lot of times we talk about intersectional movement building, and a lot of times intersectional movement building gets limited to issues and how these issues intersect. And it affects everybody. Let's connect the dots. But I think it's really our own personal journey that we have. That how are we intersecting all these experiences and everything that we have learned over time? How, in a way, you watch people in our advocacy, in our organizing, the relationship to power develops, the coziness to power develops, the dismissiveness to power develops as well. And in essence, you learn all these things. And then in the South Asian community, I'd organized for about 20 years. And one of the biggest challenges within the South Asian community, and I can say that, at least in my observation and experiences, that in the South Asian community and several other communities who are, non-white and non-black. Non-white, I say because of white supremacy, so that remains as it is. But in the non-black community, the brown and Asians and many other communities, there's a certain disease that people have. And that disease is the privilege of not being black. And that runs very, very deep. And over time, in my own journey, as I've built my life in the United States, there's this constant realization that as much as radical as we want to sound, as much as out there we want to sound, but our communities, unless we deeply, deeply confront ourselves and look at this disease, literally a disease, and that at least I'm not that. And I think unless that happens, unless we learn from and that's what my journey has been, that learning through the Black Liberation Movement and being inspired by that. I'm based out of Skid Row in downtown Los Angeles, and if people have never been there, that is probably the largest occupied zone in the United States, where within a 50-block radius, it is within 2 years, LAPD launched this Safer Cities initiative in 2006, and within a span of 2 years, LAPD issued 36,000 tickets. And these tickets were for jaywalking and urinating in public and other, just quality of life type issues. So what was interesting was that how power operates and how this whole issue of attrition through enforcement takes place. That you are using these municipal codes, you're using these laws to make people's lives so miserable that they'll be forced to leave. And when you think about it, right now as we speak, what is happening in Gaza, that how this attrition and displacement and the dehumanization and the genocide that is taking place as well. So unless we start weaving all these things together in our global view, unless we start looking at our own personal experiences and weaving them together, I think we have a long ways to go to really, really, really operationalizing and thinking of intersectional movement building. So thank you all very much.